I was 34 years old, working as an elementary school counselor, when I finally understood what my childhood summers had really meant. For 9 straight years, my Aunt Ruth kept every postcard I mailed her from the little white farmhouse where my parents sent me each June. She didn't just save them, she glued a tiny magnet to the back of each one and lined them across her refrigerator in perfect order. On July 18, 2025, at exactly 7:43 p.m., one phone notification shattered the story I had been telling myself for decades. Months later, I would stand in Aunt Ruth's kitchen, watching her press one faded postcard magnet onto my own refrigerator without saying a word. Here's what I didn't understand that evening, and what took almost 3 decades to finally see. Sometimes the family story you've memorized isn't false because people lied about it. It's false because everyone quietly agreed to leave out the part that mattered most. Growing up, I believed every family had traditions that didn't make complete sense. Ours happened every June. My mother would fold my clothes into the same blue canvas suitcase, zip it closed, kiss the top of my head, and tell me, "You'll have so much fun with Aunt Ruth." Dad would load the suitcase into the trunk before sunrise, and by 8 o'clock we were driving 2 hours north to a quiet farming town called Mill Creek. Aunt Ruth always waited on her porch. She wore gardening gloves even when she wasn't gardening. Her gray hair escaped every bun she ever attempted, and she somehow smelled like cinnamon, tomato vines, and fresh laundry all at once. Before my parents even backed out of her driveway, she'd already be asking whether I wanted blueberry pancakes or scrambled eggs. At 7 years old, that felt like love. At 16, it felt like routine. At 34, I finally realized it had been sacrifice. Every summer I stayed with Aunt Ruth lasted almost exactly 6 weeks. During those same weeks, my parents, my younger brother Dylan, and later his friends traveled somewhere new. Florida, Yellowstone, Cape Cod, Alaska. I knew because framed vacation photos appeared in our hallway every September. There was never one with me in it. I noticed, of course. Children notice almost everything. They simply become experts at deciding which observations are too dangerous to say aloud. Whenever relatives asked why I wasn't in the pictures, Mom always answered with effortless confidence. "Emma loves spending summers with Ruth." After hearing that sentence enough times, I started saying it myself. I like it better there. Sometimes I even believed it. The uncomfortable truth is that Aunt Ruth's house really was my favorite place. We baked peach pies from fruit picked behind her barn. We read mystery novels on the screened porch while thunderstorms rolled across the fields. Every Friday evening we walked to Dawson's General Store for orange soda in glass bottles. On my last night each summer, she handed me a postcard with a picture of Mill Creek's covered bridge and asked me to mail it back to her after I got home. That way, she'd say with a gentle smile, "I'll know you made it safely." I never questioned why she needed proof that I had made it home. She kept every postcard. Every single one became another little magnet on her refrigerator. Looking back now, I realize those postcards weren't souvenirs. They were her quiet way of counting the summers she borrowed someone else's daughter because the people who should have kept me had decided someone else belonged in the family vacation picture instead. When I became an adult, I convinced myself there was no reason to revisit those old feelings. My parents insisted everything had simply been practical. Dylan got carsick less when routine stayed consistent. Aunt Ruth enjoyed the company. I had always been easygoing. I accepted every explanation because accepting them required less courage than asking whether I had ever truly been included at all. By the spring of 2025, I thought those summers had become nothing more than family history. Aunt Ruth had just turned 72, and for the first time in years, she admitted climbing the orchard ladder made her knees ache. So I decided we would bring everyone to her instead of expecting her to travel. I rented the community hall beside Mill Creek Park for Saturday, July 19th, paid the $640 deposit myself, and spent 3 weekends planning a reunion that included every branch of our family. I wasn't guessing about anyone's availability. I confirmed everything. On March 8th, I emailed the proposed schedule. On March 15th, Mom replied, "Looks good." On April 2nd, Our family group chat settled on lunch at 1 p.m. On May 11th, during my cousin Rachel's graduation party, I asked again in front of 8 relatives. Dad nodded. We'll be there. Even Aunt Ruth smiled in relief. I haven't had everybody together in years. For the first time, it felt like one of those hallway photographs might finally include all of us. There was one moment I should have paid more attention to. While I was arranging seating cards on my dining room table, Mom glanced over the guest list and laughed. You always make everything so official. I just don't want anyone forgotten, I answered. She shrugged without looking up from her phone. Don't make everything personal. She said it lightly, almost affectionately, the same way someone comments on the weather. I smiled because that was easier than asking why those words suddenly made my stomach tighten. Looking back, I realized she'd been saying that sentence my entire life. When I cried because Dylan opened my birthday presents before I did. Don't make everything personal. When I asked why our family Christmas card showed everyone except me because I had been away at a school competition. Don't make everything personal. When I wondered why every vacation album seemed to have room for cousins and neighbors, but never me. The answer was always the same. As if hurt became unreasonable the moment someone named it. By mid-July, everything was ready. I wrapped Aunt Ruth's gift, a custom scrapbook filled with copies of every postcard she had ever received from me. Each page matched one of the little magnets that still covered her refrigerator. I spent nearly 14 hours scanning old photographs, writing captions, and finding dates that had faded with time. The final page simply read, "Thank you for making every place feel like home." I couldn't wait to see her face. On Friday, July 18th, I drove to Mill Creek after work. The hall was decorated by 6:45 p.m. White tablecloths, blue wildflowers in mason jars, old family photographs clipped to strands of twine. The scrapbook rested beside a chocolate cake ordered from Bennett's Bakery with green icing that read, "Happy 72nd, Aunt Ruth." She stood beside me, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from the tablecloth. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said softly. "I wanted to." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I've never needed a big party. I know, but you've deserved one for a very long time." She smiled without answering. At exactly 8:12 p.m., my phone vibrated against the wooden table. The message appeared in our family group chat. "Mom, small change of plans. We surprised Dylan with a 7-day Alaska cruise leaving tomorrow morning. Since this has always been our family vacation week, we'll celebrate with Ruth another time. She'll understand. Don't make everything personal." For a full 10 seconds, I simply stared at the screen. Then I looked up. The decorated hall. The birthday cake. The scrapbook filled with 9 summers of postcards. And Aunt Ruth, quietly reading my face before she ever asked what had happened. I handed her my phone without saying a word. She adjusted her reading glasses, read the message once, then a second time. When she finished, she didn't cry. She didn't sigh dramatically or ask how this could have happened. Instead, she locked the screen, placed the phone carefully beside the scrapbook, and began straightening the stack of paper plates as though they had somehow become crooked in the last 30 seconds. "Well," she said gently, "I suppose we won't need quite so many chairs." That quiet acceptance hurt more than any angry reaction could have. I wanted her to tell me this wasn't fair. I wanted someone older than me to finally admit that what had happened wasn't normal. Instead, she protected everyone else from the discomfort of disappointing her. Watching her fold and use napkins into neat squares, memories began lining up inside my mind with an almost frightening clarity. The vacation photographs. The missing birthday invitations. The school concerts where one chair stayed empty because Dylan had a soccer tournament. The afternoons when Mom promised we'd make it up next weekend, and somehow next weekend never arrived. None of those moments had seemed large enough to protest on their own. Together, they formed a pattern that stretched across nearly 3 decades. And the hardest truth wasn't that my parents had ranked us differently. It was that I had helped them do it. Whenever relatives asked where I had been during those childhood vacations, I smiled. I wanted to stay with Aunt Ruth. Whenever coworkers admired how close my extended family seemed, I nodded. "We're lucky." I had spent years translating neglect into convenience because the translation was easier to live with. I should have said something, I whispered. Aunt Ruth looked at me with the same patient expression she'd worn since I was 7. You were a child, Emma. I wasn't when I kept defending it. She didn't argue. She simply rested her hand over mine. Sometimes silence acknowledges guilt more honestly than reassurance ever could. The next morning, I called my cousin Rachel. She answered on the second ring. After listening for a minute, she sighed. I know it looks bad. It doesn't just look bad. I mean, Dylan already paid for activities. The cruise was expensive. So was this reunion. Emma, she said carefully, don't make this into something bigger than it is. The words landed with familiar precision. After we hung up, I called my Uncle Mark. He laughed awkwardly before saying, your mom has always organized things her own way. She canceled Aunt Ruth's birthday for a vacation. I'm just saying, families survive worse. Only if someone notices they're breaking. He didn't answer. By noon I understood that the people who should have stood beside me were far more comfortable standing beside the version of events they already knew. Not because they believed it. Because changing the story would require admitting they had watched it happen. That afternoon, while I carried folding chairs back into the storage room, Aunt Ruth's neighbor, Mrs. Helen Brooks, walked in holding a basket of fresh peaches she'd picked that morning. She noticed the untouched cake, the empty hall, and the extra tables. What happened? I told her. Every word. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she didn't search for explanations. She didn't soften anyone's choices. She simply looked at me and said, Emma, you know you're allowed to stop auditioning for a place that's supposed to be yours already. No one had ever given me permission to think about my family that way. In that quiet community hall, with unopened gifts stacked against the wall and 9 postcard memories waiting inside a scrapbook, I realized I had spent most of my life trying to earn membership in a family that kept treating my absence as part of the tradition. That was the moment I stopped trying to fit inside the old story and started wondering what kind of new one I could build instead. Mrs. Helen's words stayed with me during the drive home. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to convince my parents they had hurt me. I was thinking about what life might look like if I stopped asking for permission to belong. The next morning, I opened my laptop and began typing. My first draft lasted exactly 3 sentences. I hope Alaska was worth throwing away your own family. I stared at it for less than a minute before highlighting every word and pressing delete. The second draft wasn't much better. You've been replacing me with Dylan since I was 7. I'm done pretending I don't notice. That one was true. It was also written by the version of me that still wanted them to feel what I had felt. I deleted it too. After making coffee, I started over one last time. I'm grateful for everyone who came together to celebrate Aunt Ruth, even if the gathering turned out smaller than planned. Beginning next June, I'll be hosting an annual summer weekend at Mill Creek for anyone who wants to spend time together. There won't be schedules built around one person or traditions that leave someone behind. The invitation will always remain open. I read it twice. There was no accusation. No courtroom language. No request for an apology. Just a different door. I sent it at 9:14 a.m. 3 minutes later, Mom replied with only 2 words. Your choice. For the first time in my life, those words felt less like rejection than freedom. The following June, 23 people came to Mill Creek. Children chased fireflies behind Aunt Ruth's barn. My cousins played cards on the porch. Someone burned the first batch of hamburgers, and everyone laughed instead of pretending perfection mattered. Inside the farmhouse, Aunt Ruth placed the scrapbook beside the refrigerator. The row of postcard magnets had grown into the room's quiet centerpiece. Every visitor stopped to read them. Every visitor asked why there were 9. For the first time, the answer wasn't hidden. I simply said, those were the summers she made sure I never felt abandoned. A month later, my cousin Rachel called after returning from another polished family vacation with my parents. It was beautiful, she admitted. Then she paused. But everyone kept looking at old pictures instead of making new memories. I knew exactly what she meant. Some gatherings are impressive. Others are alive. Nearly 6 months after the reunion that never happened, my parents arrived at Aunt Ruth's farmhouse without calling first. Mrs. Helen happened to be visiting, so I asked my parents to wait on the porch while we finished our coffee. It wasn't punishment. It was simply the first time I refused to rearrange everyone else's piece around their timing. When I finally invited them inside, Mom tried the familiar smile that usually ended uncomfortable conversations. It wasn't meant the way you took it. I nodded politely. I know that's how you remember it. Then she reached for another old habit. We've always done our best. I answered just as calmly. And now I'm doing mine. Neither sentence changed anything, because neither one controlled the room anymore. After several quiet minutes, Mom looked toward Aunt Ruth instead of me. Her voice became smaller than I had ever heard it. Did we really lose 9 summers? No one answered immediately. Finally, I said, before anything else, Aunt Ruth deserves the apology we've all waited too long to hear. She nodded. Without arguing. Without explaining. The conversation that followed between the two of them happened privately on the back porch. I never asked exactly what was said, and Aunt Ruth never volunteered the details. When they came back inside, both women had been crying softly, but there was a lightness between them that hadn't existed before. The next June became our new tradition. No child was sent somewhere else so another could feel more important. No one checked seating charts to see who mattered most. Mom arrived carrying a small package. Without making a speech, she quietly added a 10th postcard magnet to the refrigerator. It was blank except for one handwritten sentence. Everyone belongs this summer. Dylan brought his 2 young daughters, and before they left that weekend, I watched them helping Aunt Ruth pick peaches behind the barn, the same orchard where I had spent so many childhood mornings. This time, there wasn't one family making memories while another waited somewhere else. There was only one family, imperfect but finally together. Sometimes people ask whether I regret those 9 summers away from home. I tell them something that surprises even me. Aunt Ruth gave me a childhood filled with kindness. My parents accidentally taught me how easily love can become unequal. It took 9 summers, one text at 8:12 p.m., and a single open invitation to understand the difference. Because a real family isn't measured by who gets invited on the vacation, it is measured by who never has to wonder whether they belong.